it comes to God's plan, I often hear it referred to in the context of a particular plan for a particular life. Usually it's mentioned in the context of a person who feels as though God has a specific plan for them, for their time on earth, which is not an unreasonable conclusion. It adds a layer of meaning to events, both good and bad. But there are a couple of things to consider, I would say, that are almost unbreakable rules in this whole thing. One of them is that it's made pretty clear in the Bible that human beings have a free and unadulterated will of their own. And when one considers God's plan on earth, one has to consider that within that context, within a human being whose will is free. So when one considers events that happened and things that people say and do, thoughts that seem to occur to us out of nowhere sometimes, one has to subtract the idea that we live in a fully determined universe. It's almost like it's this highly nuanced situation. It's almost like a sort of contract or constitution that protects us from determinism. It's like free will is like a barrier that God specifically noted that keeps us out of a situation where we can be directly, let's say, taken over or become this sort of direct vessel which God can occupy and take over our actions. Because all throughout the Bible, human beings are spoken to, they are persuaded, they are put in situations, but the choice is never made for them. Over and over and over and over and over again in the Bible, God is the facilitating force, the one who creates the structure for our decisions to be made within. Like, the apple is one of them. It's the first one. And if the relationship between God and humans is like that of a parent and children, it makes complete sense. Because if I had children, I also would not want the ability to permanently be able to take over their will and completely make their decisions for them, as much as I would want to sometimes, as much as I would feel it necessary sometimes. Ultimately, all that I can do is my best to raise them in a proper environment that arms them and equips them with the necessary faculties to make decisions that are pleasing to as many people as possible, but namely my hypothetical children themselves. And one of the primary things that develops this healthy decision-making faculty is a healthy relationship between me and them. If I had children and they ended up loving me, truly, it would be far better if it were the result of a ongoing relationship versus me being able to just command it. In fact, if I could command it, it would take every bit of meaning straight out of it, and it would be absolutely pointless to even say it. And that brings you back to such a universe as ours would actually be a bit pointless if it were fully determined. it would take away everything. So it's kind of easy for one to conclude that free will is sacred and it can't be violated when considering what we mean when we say God's plan. And within that, as I've said, we are created, made, exist within the image of this architect, which is a huge clue as to the plan. If we were to hypothetically have a conversation, stand before God and just talk, there would be no misunderstanding what we meant when we described things like justice, fairness, love, happiness, sadness, despair. It would be a very easy back and forth because we have the exact same sort of reasoning, same sort of emotional tether to that reasoning and events and logic, in conjunction with this planet, this universe that we live in. So, part of the plan is to endow a sort of children with a identical, so far as I can tell, sort of reasoning, but with limitations, not as powerful as the Creator himself, but still quite powerful. Powerful enough, just powerful enough, in fact, to successively discover more. Our intelligence is just powerful enough to make progress and mistakes, but to overall make progress at the same time, so long as we use those faculties of ours to their utmost. And it just so happens in this universe, the more we learn about Earth, reality, ourselves even, the animals of Earth, the plants, the waters, the skies, the stars, the more we learn about those things, the more we learn of ourselves. They're not at all disconnected. And the more we learn of those things and of ourselves, the more we learn of God. There's a sort of triangular relationship there. The more we know of God, the more we know of the universe. The more we know of ourselves, we know of God. And the more we know of the universe, the more we know of both. And it just so happens that if we are turned loose on Earth and start with nothing but self-awareness, nothing but self-consciousness, nothing but this fall from grace, this first decision, we begin in successive circles. First, we find out that this world is even able to be changed at all. At first, we are seemingly complete subjects to the world. I mean, there's all sorts of things out there that impose themselves onto us, even our own thoughts. But in time, we learn of the various fabrics and liquids, the various constitutions of various things, and we learn how they can be arranged together. We learn of interrelationships among families, among people who are bound by blood, and other collectives who are also bound by blood, but of one species, one race, all of one similar reasoning, all who generally want the same thing, who generally want peace, who generally want their work to be helpful, who want to make it easier and better for successive generations, who want to increase leisure time, who also have an innate curiosity about reality itself. And within this curiosity, there are poisons, and there are things that instantly bring us health. And sometimes, in the right doses, in the right places, those poisons become things that bring health. They become cures. And vice versa, sometimes in the wrong doses, in the wrong places, those things that bring health bring pain. And there's a great diversity of those things all over the place all the time that are interlinked and interlocked with other things. And it is that line between that nuance, fueled by our curiosity and our sense of the beautiful, actually, that causes us to expand further and further out in successive circles and learn more. And over time, we bring more comfort, more leisure. We build up advantages. We find better ways to render justice, to discipline, to make things more fair, even though there are periods of time where it's less fair. And fairness isn't a guarantee. It's not something owed, but it is one of those things that we can comprehend ourselves as something desirable, and thus must be desirable to somebody else too. Should we be able to bring that into the world, we like that when we can. So, imagine a situation, at least this is how I think about it sometimes. Imagine you're God and you're sitting in front of what looks like a sort of digital screen. Something like that, some way to interact. And there's Earth. And you have all of the land masses at first together. First you have the land masses all together as one, so you can build them as one item. And then you take your fingers and split them off and separate them. And you watch them very quickly assume their positions and where they will be when humanity is there. And from his point of view, it's quick. Like if we were in a video game or some sort of computer program, we could very quickly watch that play out. But on Earth, in real time, there's millions of years that it takes. And several highly complex natural processes that take place to even allow that to happen. There are certain implications about Earth itself that have to be true for that to happen the way it did. But from this point of view, it's very simplistic, and all those things are already inlaid in the scheme. They're already part of the whole situation. But from God's point of view, time is different. But from our point of view, it's extremely fixed unless we do things that drastically change, especially speed. But that's a whole other subject. But why would you do that? Why would you separate the land masses? Why would you have that happen? To do that, you would have a plan in mind. And part of that plan would likely include the expansion of people on separate continents where they grow differently but the same. Where a situation comes about where humanity might be able to meet at itself yet be alien to itself at the same time. So that different groups may have something that they could offer each other, or even conquer each other, whatever it may be. But everybody is given sort of their own spawn point, let's say. And it's in continuation with this that leads me to say over and over again that the plan of God is the facilitating structure. The things that facilitate the possibility of us and all that we do, but not a full possession of us, and not a full determination for us. I mean, there might be exceptions. There might be people who that is true for. There might be people who God directly intervenes. And I'm less likely to say that in this era and more likely to say that in the previous era, because that did happen in the previous era. God was far more present in the previous era. And it was almost like after Jesus, after he showed up himself in the form of us, that he basically said, it's yours now. I'm not going to be heavily intervening with your affairs anymore because of all of the history that happened prior. I mean, I imagine that first situation, it's like, so far on Earth, humanity has been presented with a series of very dramatic situations which allowed the possibility of choices that led in very different directions. And the situation of the fallen angels is one of those things, because that series of events led to a very particular outcome. And in a fully determined universe, God simply wouldn't probably have let that happen because of how much suffering it brought to Earth. And in the past, there were so many polytheistic cultures. And the notion of polytheism fits very well with the Bible's version of the fallen angels having come down to Earth to rule over humanity and live among humanity, teach us things, interbreed with us. I mean, it seems to fit fairly well because monotheism shows up with the Abrahamic religions later on, which is exactly fitting of the timeline post-flood. And the flood happened as a sort of reset because things had gotten so bad on Earth, I mean unbelievably bad, it became the model for what hell would eventually become. I mean, unbelievable suffering. And decisions were made, you know. It was a very, very, very different time. Young humanity being taught things like the ability to make weapons and politics and the basics, you know. But, such a severe event, God, instead of commanding and willing the people of Earth to stop worshiping these fallen angels and worship him instead of doing that, he flooded it, which is something that you would do if you were dealing with entities with a free will. And then he shows up in the form of a man. We know the story in part to permeate his name forever and to show that you weren't just made to figure it out down here. I am also with you. And I'm willing to take on your sin and your suffering myself so as to understand every nook and cranny of it. Which didn't have to happen. I mean, if I were a god, I would really have to care about my creations to become one of them, to bear their sin and suffering so as to give them another shot and just basically reset everything. And there's a huge before and after point right there. It's part of why time and the way we document history is as such. It's this sort of 0 point. And you could say he had a plan. There was a reason why he did that. And that's why I don't blame the Jewish people for doing what they did, putting him up on that cross, because he knew that would happen. He was completely aware of all of that and let it happen, just like with the fallen angels, just like with biting the fruit, because we have a will that's free. But there is a plan. So that happens, and then here we are 2,000 years later, and it's as if it just happened. There's something about that story that imminently calls. And I can't stress enough how important it is to actually have a relationship with this architect, because it does actually change the way you experience life on a day-to-day basis. It changes the way things seem to happen. It's almost like a strange cheat code in a way, you know? To actually, believe that too, like in your heart. There's a difference between thinking you should theoretically and really, buying in. And if you can get somebody like me to buy in, then anybody can, because I was worse than Hitchens. I was worse than Carl Sagan, you know. I was about as anti-religious as you could get. Not physically. I wasn't out there, fighting against it, but intellectually. And I've just seen things happen on Earth and in time from various investigations and studies that lead me to conclude nothing else. And the more you understand yourself, the more you understand God, and vice versa. And the more we understand about this world, the more we discover and learn, the more we understand about both. They're connected. And when the men of the scientific era, the scientific revolution, set out to learn of the world, part of their primary motivation was to find out how God did it. And at some point we deviated from that, but that is the truth. And we've been storing information about this world for quite some time now. And we've been investigating it for quite some time. And there are some things that are coming back around in a full circle kind of way. And one of those things is Darwin himself said he was unable to find a way in which different species became each other. And he said without this, the theory of evolution will remain as such, because it is one of the most vital components. It was found pretty easily, and it fits very well with rationale, that within species there are changes that usually correspond in some way with one's environment. We see that fairly often, and that makes perfect sense, to be honest, and that's easy to show. But there's an issue at the center of that, because so far as I am aware, random genetic mutations are problematic. They're almost never, if never, beneficial. Genetic mutations are cancerous. They're tumors, they're misfires, they are disfigurements that are never helpful, ever. I don't think we've observed a helpful mutation that comes about at random. It's akin to beaming radiation at somebody and having them become Superman. And in order for a creature, let's say like a bird, to have their beak even grow longer to help them in life, takes a huge number of changes to work at the same time for a specific reason. And there's nothing random about that. If one were to just simply and objectively observe, it's more easy to conclude some sort of reason or purpose in such a change. Because the argument, I believe, went that random mutations would result in physical changes that also happened to benefit any given creature, which is a series of events less likely than abiogenesis, than life itself coming to be. Even once, it's less likely for a random mutation to result in a physical change that was beneficial to a species or animal or creature that happened to correspond with the environment. Those things are not compatible. Either there are random changes that happen to come about that happen to be beneficial, or there are specific changes that correspond to the environment. Those are two very different things. And when you look at it, it's far easier to think that there is something else at play here. There is some other, let's say, force that has inlaid into life itself something that allows genetic changes in correspondence with the changes of Earth. I mean, that's perfectly reasonable, and that's perfectly observable as well. We see different people from different places. We see different animals in different places that match and have very specific features that correspond with their environments. A very seamless thing. Very rarely do you see a fish out of water just fine. Actually, you don't see that. And it is my contention that there is nothing random about that. There's actually seemingly something embedded into reality and life itself that allows these changes to happen intelligently and with purpose between any animal, any species, and its environment to allow a sort of growth together, which makes far more sense than random mutations that just happen to correspond to the environment. That is impossible, basically, to happen even once, let alone hundreds of millions of billions of times. Because, like I said, for a beak to grow longer, it takes more than one change. It doesn't just take one minute happenstance change and all of a sudden there's a longer beak. It takes a confluence of changes within an animal, within their genetic code, to get that longer beak, because it's changes to the face as well. It's changes to the actual structure of the bird. And another thing, this strange situation where, hypothetically, let's say there's a bird existing through its life, and it realizes at some point that it would be helpful to have a longer beak. And as a result, it just so happens to bear a child who has a longer beak. In that situation, is it the desires and thoughts and needs of this animal that causes this change? Is there something deeper, more or less conscious, that could cause this change? And I know for sure, as human beings, we have had many desires on a much deeper, far more intellectual, reasonable, logical level that I'm sure we would love to have. I would love to have nocturnal vision. But I don't see it possible for my desire and need for such a thing alone to facilitate such a change. I find it absurd to think that I might have a child with nocturnal vision because it might have benefited me in my lifetime. I don't think it just corresponds to my needs like that. And then to think that it could happen at random, and the amount of changes, again, that would be necessary for nocturnal vision are more than simple. There's far more at play there. And then if my child had a random genetic mutation, it would be a catastrophic situation, because genes, our genetic code, is meant to be followed and grown according to verbatim. Any mistake, any change is catastrophic. And no matter how many times you breed dogs, and no matter what variety, you will never get a lemur. It'll never change species. It will always remain within the fixed type of canine. You might get great variety, great size difference, huge genetic diversity within that species. But to get it to change into another species is another matter entirely. And then you go from ants to dogs to birds. The amount of change necessary to bring about an entity with a nervous system and a mind and a brain and a will and a feeling to live on is absolutely immense. And to think this process goes on devoid of design or some sort of plan is astoundingly wishful in thinking. It's to the point now where there are so many holes in this that it's not possible to think that it's a blind process that came from a mix in water and the elements of life. To say that out loud actually feels quite strange now. And years ago I thought it plausible, you know? I actually wanted it to be plausible. But it's not. It's actually a bit of an underselling of humanity, you know, to say that. I would say speak for yourself on that one, you know. Because we harbor within us, of course, the components of divinity and the animal. We are both those things. It is a unique situation to us. We are aware of the sterile. We are aware of justice. But we are also beasts, in a way. And it is the harmonious relationship between those things that makes a happy person, let's say. Because the components and elements of our lives in their fullness require us to bring those things together. Sometimes this here and that there. We can't just deny these things, you know. And somebody who looks at this might say that there's a plan there. And somebody also might say to look into these things and discover them further and further might reveal more about ourselves and God and the universe. And it is something to marvel at. For me it is something to marvel at. Because of the immense beauty that I see. Over and over and over again on a day-to-day basis. It's impossible to miss. And within all of this, it should be known and remembered that we do have a will that is free. And the sort of reasoning that we bear and the emotion that we have is the exact same sort of thing that God has. I remember when I was reading the Bible once, and I saw that God was a jealous God, a vengeful God. I was like, man, he has emotions? Emotions. Okay, that's interesting. That seems less significant, but it says so much, you know, about our relationship, our way, and our ability to understand. And we have the exact same faculties, just existing, just enough to let time expand. I mean, say we started out with all of the information, wisdom, and the things that we know now. How quickly, how too much of an advantage it would have been for one person to have. How, you know, within a very short period of time, you could have one civilization just dominate another. It had to happen with us a bit separated. When we go to South America and we look at civilizations past, we're trying to find out something about ourselves in this distant place. And when we're going to India from Great Britain, we're trying to discover new foods, new spices, new people. We're trying to find out. And we're brought into all of these things with a more dramatic element. It's not always so conscious so as to say, I'm trying to find this out. But we have something in us this sort of barometer, this ever-aware component that brings us forth. And this component is eminently recognizable in God. And like I said, I'm sure, in the old days, in the beginning, God was intervening with humanity far more. We were far younger then. We needed intervention more. We didn't have these things so well established. The books of the Bible, there was a time where they didn't even exist. And if you read that book, basically every element and component within our psyche and emotional circuitry, let's say, exists there. You can find something for just about everything in that book. And it's pretty amazing. And one has to remember, this is not a scientific collection of documents. It's something very different altogether. And you can start to understand God more when you understand you are both tethered and at the same time untethered. And we have this thing in us that constantly wants to know more and more and more. And I view it like there is so much territory that we haven't even found yet. Even the departure from Earth, a very special place. Very special. And even the sun, our nearest star, a very special thing. And a very special relationship. Everything is just so. And even the fabric of reality itself, the norms and, let's say, laws, as some people call them, that even hold things together, that keep like particles together, structured being, exist in a way that is just so. It's this very, very thin line where everything is in a state of being because of it. And long ago I realized you can have a central architect, a creator, who builds into his creation a method and way for things to grow in a way that is seemingly self-intelligent, self-propagating, so that it may grow into something that surprises you, something different. And within that scheme, I may also create something like myself, but mortal, which is ultimately a gift from the point of view of an immortal being. Because mortality is so ubiquitous for us that sometimes it's easy to forget what it offers. It offers a level of meaning and realism and stakes that we could not get otherwise. It's extremely important that we are mortal because it was the wishes and plan of an immortal being that it be that way. And it's almost like these angels, these original companions, original children, were the sort of test case. They are immortal as well, but they provide counsel that isn't really needed but enjoyed, and company that is enjoyed. They all have wills of their own. And they're almost like the first phase of 3 phases that eventually ended, at least in this iteration of the universe, with human beings with the same faculties and comprehension as these angels and the God that came before us. And that's the plan. That's the plan. And it is an important feature of that plan, the will that is free, and all the complexity therein, to initiate it, set it right, and then find out and see what they're capable of, what they'll do, what they'll discover. Will they or will they not find out about themselves and of he who started it all? How much will they find out about that? How much will their civilizations collect and learn, study and understand about this world that they're in and about the one who made it? How much will they come to understand about this entire situation? And how much peace will it bring them? That's the plan.